If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
There are thousands of missing person cases in the United States, but few have captured the attention, imagination, and passion that Maura Murray's 2004 disappearance has. It was even the subject of the Oxygen Network's 6-part series, The Disappearance of Maura Murray.
And Tim, no one knows this better than you and I because we started working on a documentary about Maura Murray in 2013, and this was an exploration into the fascinating world of citizen detecting. We started the podcast 2 years later and soon realized that we could do more in bringing answers to Maura's case as well as other cold cases.
That's right, and the Maura Murray case has raised many ethical and social questions. How do we, as true crime media, interact with law enforcement, family and friends of victims, potential persons of interest?
And how do we know when we've crossed that ever-elusive line between ethics and entertainment? These are the issues that we deal with.
So join us for the journey that is the Missing Maura Murray podcast. We started it in 2015. There are over 100 episodes on the disappearance of Maura Murray. We traveled to the site of her disappearance. We received actual threats. We hiked a mountain, and we head to Canada with an obsessed journalist.
So listen as the show grows and matures with support from a network of peers in the true crime arena.
Listen to Missing Maura Murray on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
You're listening to Scene of the Crime, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, and 3 Men and a Mystery. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts.
As we saw in the previous episode, investigators from Iowa and Galesburg, Illinois, worked together to try to establish whether there was a connection between the 2 horrific homicides in hotels in their jurisdictions, and if so, whether Raimundo Esparza might have been the killer. Thanks to the appeal sent out to other law enforcement agencies across the nation, investigators' attention was soon drawn to yet another case that had echoes of the Amana and Galesburg hotel murders. This was a case from 1970. Although it had occurred 10 years earlier, it had to be considered by law enforcement investigating the 1980 murders because of the similarity of circumstances, particularly to the Kyle case, which itself had so many echoes of the Amana case. Here is Paul Holes.
I'm looking at William Kyle and Roger and Rose's case, and I'm just stunned at the stack of behaviors that I think is so unique that it's a signature of the offender and that it's the same offender involved in both. There's another case that's more just casually mentioned that had happened 10 years prior in Mississippi. This Jack McDonald, a single male, found hatcheted to death inside his hotel room in the exact position, left in the exact position as William Kyle. You know, William Kyle and Jack McDonald are found, with their knees on their floor, their upper body on their bed.
On October 27, 1970, Jack Wayne McDonald, a 23-year-old resident of Birmingham, Alabama, was found dead in his motel room at the Travel Inn in Meridian, Mississippi. The Travel Inn housekeeper, Adelaide Wooten, later told investigators that she had knocked on the door to room 412 around 8:30 a.m. and gently opened it after receiving no response. She saw a man who appeared to be sleeping on the bed, so she pulled the door closed. She returned at 1 p.m., which was checkout time, this time in the company of the head housekeeper, Mrs. Leggett. They discovered the man in room 412 kneeling and face down with his upper body on the bed. Blood was everywhere, spattered all over the bed and the walls. The hotel manager, Mrs. Anthony, promptly called the police. Meridian Chief of Detectives L.A. Willoughby responded to the scene personally, in the company of a Detective Creel. They found Jack McDonald in the nude, a sheet draped over his buttocks and a washcloth gag inserted into his throat. He had his arms under his head, which was turned to the side. Their first thoughts went to suicide. Perhaps this man had shot himself. Only when they turned him over were they able to observe that this was no suicide. The victim had apparently been bludgeoned to death with a heavy, sharp instrument like a hatchet, machete, or meat cleaver. He was wounded only on his head. No weapon was found. This case foreshadowed the 1980 murders because there was no forced entry into the room, which appeared relatively undisturbed. Jack McDonald's underwear was on the floor near the bed, and the remainder of his clothes he had worn that day were also on the floor at the foot of the bed. His wallet, containing $60 in cash from a check cashed that morning, his license, a Bank AmeriCard, a Standard Oil credit card, and photos were missing. The victim's white gold Timex watch, white gold wedding band, white gold sapphire ring, silver cigarette lighter, and set of keys were still in the room, found on the dresser. No one had heard anything. The Travel Inn was the type of hotel, motel really, where each room was accessed by an outdoor breezeway and had a designated parking spot in front of it. Jack's room, room 412, was located in the rear of the building, 2 doors down from the far corner, in a hotel that was just 75 feet off the interstate. And the clincher, described by Paul Holes.
In the Jack McDonald case, he had toothpaste squirted into the toilet.
Toothpaste had been squirted out at this third hotel murder scene. Several latent fingerprints and palm prints were lifted from the room. Of particular note was one print that was smeared in blood. Investigators were certain that this print was left by their killer. Detectives McNair and Dandridge lifted a total of 21 latent fingerprints and 2 palm prints from the room. As they inventoried room 412 with the help of hotel staff, investigators determined that some other things were in fact missing. 1 hand towel, 1 bath towel, and 1 drinking glass are all listed as missing. And the list includes 1 item as possibly missing, a t-shirt. Now, of course, it seems possible that the hotel housekeepers might simply have miscounted, and the 2 missing towels were never there in the first place. And the drinking glass could easily have been used as a roadie cup, as it seems that Jack McDonald liked his beverages. Mississippi investigators set to work trying to determine what was going on with this brutal and senseless murder. Because this case occurred in 1970, 50 years ago, most of the detectives' notes were scribbled in notebooks, not entered into digital information sharing databases. We were able to review some documents, but much of the original detail has been lost. Here is what we have been able to piece together. Investigators learned that the victim, Jack McDonald, was the son of Annie and Ira McDonald. His father was a construction worker who died of cancer. He had 4 sisters, Nell Bridges, Yvonne Dunn, Ira Lou Norsworthy, and Joanne Dunn. McDonald had worked for Southern BAP Industries, a Birmingham, Alabama-based firm that sold parts for foreign automobiles for several years. He had recently relocated to Birmingham from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, when he was transferred 6 weeks earlier. McDonald was on his first trip to Meridian for his employer and had left Birmingham around 1 p.m. on the day he died. He drove toward Meridian and was seen at the bar at Peppa's Restaurant and Lounge, 25 miles outside the city, around 6 p.m. He spent $5 on drinks and left around 7:30. He checked into the Travel Inn between 8 and 8:30 p.m. alone. Oddly, though, McDonald's wife, Jean Keith McDonald, did not know that her husband was in Meridian. The two had recently been separated, with Jean and their 2 kids staying with her mother while the couple hashed things out. They had only gotten back together the day before McDonald left on his sales trip on the 26th. McDonald's wife told investigators that when her husband was on the road, he would get together with buddies if they were around. His friends were mostly work customers and associates. He tended to call her every other night from the road, usually between 7:30 and 9 before bed. He did not sleep in his t-shirt unless it was winter. He never slept with his rings or watch on. A Dr. C.B. Mitchell performed the autopsy at St. Joseph Hospital in Meridian. The coroner's report reads as follows.
There were multiple large wounds of the chopping type, laying open the scalp and the skull. The hair was matted with blood. In addition to the chopping wounds, multiple smaller wounds of the cutting type were also present over the scalp and face. A washcloth had been stuffed in the mouth, pushing the tip of the tongue back into the back of the throat. No wounds of significance were identified below the neck. Conclusion. The cause of death is listed as hemorrhage and shock from multiple chopping-type wounds of the head.
Dr. Mitchell also found that McDonald had undigested food in his stomach and had been in full rigor mortis when found. So he concluded that the estimated time of death was between 11:30 p.m. and 7:30 a.m., but that it was likely much earlier, probably within 2 hours of completing his meal. This was believed to be the dinner he ate at 10:30. If he ate after that, it was not known. The maid's statement that she had seen the body lying on the bed, seemingly asleep, and then later that day seen the body kneeling appears to have been discounted as inaccurate. It emerged later that Dr. Mitchell, while a pathologist, had failed to perform some crucial testing during the autopsy, according to J.M. Hatcher, Chief of Detectives in Meridian, in a letter he wrote to Iowa County Sheriff William Spurrier after the Amanda murders. The pathologist was not trained in forensics and did not look for any evidence that Jack McDonald had been sexually abused. He also made no determination regarding what type of weapon could have been used. Another medical examiner who was present during the autopsy, Marl Kobler, later stated that he believed the murder weapon to be a machete. He had even obtained a machete and compared the wounds on the body to the weapon, and concluded that one like it was likely used on Jack McDonald. Head coroner Stevens reported to the media only that McDonald had suffered 7 or 8 deep blows to the head. McDonald's car was found locked in its designated parking spot outside his room. Investigators went to work speaking with hotel staff and guests and interviewing the dead man's friends and family. They could not find any links whatsoever between the murder victim and the town in which he died. Furthermore, investigators could not find anyone with a motive to kill the young man. There was one potential lead in the McDonald case early on. Meridian police called in assistance from the much larger police force in Jackson and also made use of the media to circulate a sketch artist's rendering of a possible person of interest. This was a man who had been seen in the bar at the Travel Inn, the Purple Onion, by bartender Helen Daniels and waitress Pat Moore. Jack McDonald had been seated at the bar there around 8:30 p.m. This man came in about 5 minutes after the victim and sat down at the bar nearby. Helen said she had never seen McDonald before, but she could not be sure whether the other man had been there before or not. Pat, however, was sure that this man had been in the Purple Onion the week before, on the 19th. On this Monday night, the man and McDonald struck up a conversation about boxing and football. Both Helen and Pat gathered that one of the men was from Birmingham and the other was from Jackson. The two men asked Helen how to get to the Travelers Club, a local establishment. They each departed before 9:30 p.m., but the bartender could not be sure that they had left together. Pat Moore told investigators that she went home sick at 9:30. Two men, believed to be McDonald and his companion from the hotel bar, were then seen eating dinner together at 10:30 p.m. by Nancy Reese, a waitress at Weidman's restaurant, and several of her coworkers. One busboy told police that the man in the photo they showed him, Jack McDonald, had stopped him near the men's restroom and asked if he knew where he and his friend could get a woman. The busboy told him he did not know. The Weidman's waitress said that she saw McDonald and his companion getting into a dark green Chevy Chevelle with a black vinyl top, bucket seats, and a Hines County license plate. This was not Jack McDonald's car. Helen Daniels, Pat Moore, and Weidman's hostess Pauline Rowell each sat down with police sketch artists to create a drawing of the man seen with McDonald. This sketch became a primary tool in the investigation. The man depicted in the sketch was described by witnesses as being about 30 years old, 6 feet tall, and about 170 pounds. He had wavy or curly sandy-colored hair, light-colored eyes, and ruddy skin. He wore a brown suit, and, most distinctive, according to Pat Moore, he spoke with a thick accent, described in contemporary reports as being either a German accent or a brogue, which would certainly stand out in the Deep South. The best police could gather, McDonald and the man seen with him were casual acquaintances who had met over drinks at the hotel bar prior to going to dinner. It was possible, based on supposed witness sightings, that the two had then gone over to the Travelers Club, a drinking establishment where, it seemed, women tended to gather to meet men. Someone who was identified by witnesses as possibly Jack McDonald was seen there with 3 other men. And the man that the witnesses believed to be McDonald was very, very drunk. But no one could be sure, and 2 waitresses at the club were certain that McDonald was not there that night. Police even brought the owner of the club, Ferdy Moore, to the funeral home to see the body, but he could not be sure that the dead man had been in his bar that night. Police conducted a years-long, exhaustive investigation into the Jack McDonald murder. It seems that the direction the investigation took was, as in the Kyle case, one that assumed that homosexual activities were involved. The victim had last been seen in the company of a male and had been found in the nude. Police files that we looked at in the course of preparing this podcast, however, admit that there was absolutely nothing to base this on in Jack McDonald's background. One of the detective's reports states specifically, quote, "The investigation revealed nothing to indicate that he was a homosexual." Nevertheless, Galesburg Detective Horton's case notes that we reviewed state, quote, "Meridian, Mississippi authorities confirmed that their subject was at least a bisexual." Sometime between 1970 and 1980, Jack McDonald's sexual identity became blurred in the minds of investigators. There was also some drama in the McDonald family that needed to be investigated. Mrs. McDonald had been married before and was not on good terms with her ex-husband. Jean told them that she hadn't had contact with him in 4 years, and he had custody of their 3 children. Jean's father was in prison when she was born and had done time for murder several years before Jack was killed. And finally, Jean's brother, Admiral Dewey Keith Jr., was a gambler who frequented Meridian and had had run-ins with his brother-in-law Jack in the past. He currently lived in Dothan, Alabama. His fingerprints did not match those found at the scene. Over the course of the investigation, detectives came across all kinds of information that had to be checked out. Here are just some of the tips, leads, and evidence detectives in Meridian followed up on. Many of these seemed to complicate rather than resolve the case. A maid at the Meridian Holiday Inn, located near the Travel Inn, told her manager that she found a bloody T-shirt in one of the rooms she was cleaning on the morning of October 27th. This was either room 513, 515, or 517. Police then had to check on the occupants of all these rooms and try to determine the origins of the bloody shirt. What they determined is unknown. Detective Willoughby received a call from a detective in the Jackson, Mississippi PD who informed him that he had received a tip to the effect that McDonald and his male companion had been furnished with 2 prostitutes by a pimp. After they finished with the girls, the men complained that the price was too high and refused to pay. The unnamed pimp then attacked the 2 and beat McDonald savagely to the point that he died. The other man was also beaten and had to be treated by a doctor in Jackson. If you recall, a busboy had told investigators that a man he identified as McDonald had asked him where he and his buddy could get a woman. So this story about the vengeful pimp possibly had some weight to it. Annie Adams, a maid at another Meridian hotel, the Downtowner, told this story. Around 8 a.m. on the morning of the 27th, she knocked on the door of room 319. The door was locked, and she opened it with a key, and there was a man in the bed who looked like he was injured, as if he had been in a fight or an accident. She could see something she described as a piece of rusty iron lying on the floor under some clothing. Later, when he vacated the room, she found a white hand towel and a bath towel with blood on them. There was blood on one of the pillowcases as well. She described the man, who she later saw walking to his car, as 6'1", average weight, brownish red hair, ruddy complexion, handsome, wearing a brown suit. A worker at this same hotel verified that he had seen Jack McDonald, identified from a photo shown to him by detectives, in the company of another man in the hotel lobby that night. Unfortunately, hotel staff was unable to determine who had stayed in room 319 that night. It was implied from the police records that it was considered possible that the room had been rented under the table for cash. When the man in room 319 left the hotel that morning, he left the key inside the room. A reliable jail informant named Waco Wayne Criswell told police that a man named Jimmy of Jimmy's Shell truck stop in Grand Ridge, Florida, had taken out a contract on Jack McDonald for unknown reasons. A hitman named Sam Lee, who was 6'4" and 300 pounds, was the hired killer. Police determined that the contractor was Jimmy Albritton, who ran the eponymous truck stop and was known to have a violent temper. Unfortunately, the informant, Criswell, was released from jail and killed by his in-laws, and it doesn't seem that this line of inquiry went anywhere. In a case that was examined to see if it could be related, a Meridian man named Henderson S. Brown was arrested in New Orleans for murdering a Texas man named Jack M. Clark in a hotel room. Clark and Brown had checked into the Roslyn Hotel together and shared a room. After killing his roommate, Brown left the room to inform the front desk that he was departing, but that his roommate was staying another day and did not want to be disturbed. This plan to flee the scene was foiled when a maid happened to glimpse Clark's dead body after Brown left the door ajar. Brown ran from the hotel when the maid started screaming and was apprehended by some street repairmen and held until police arrived. The victim, it was determined, had died after being beaten about the face and head. Brown had a record of 19 arrests in Meridian, mostly for drunk and disorderly or DWI charges. At 54, Brown was older than the Meridian police believed their suspect in the sketch to be, but the similarities between the crimes could not be ignored. Unfortunately, there was no evidence that Brown had been anywhere near the Travel Inn on October 26th, and his prints did not match those lifted at the scene. He was never named as a suspect. A U.S. attorney named C. Raggio checked into room 413 at the Travel Inn around 5:30 p.m. on the 26th. This was the room next door to Jack McDonald's room 412. Raggio was in Meridian with a work colleague named Donald Strange, who was in a nearby room. Raggio dropped his things in his room and then went to meet his colleague at the Purple Onion, and the two entertained two women in Strange's room before heading out as a foursome to the Travelers Club. He returned to his room between 10:30 and 11 p.m. As we mentioned, the Travel Inn was one of those hotels where hotel room doors opened directly to the outdoors and had parking spots assigned according to room number. As Raggio went to park his car, he observed a parked vehicle with a blonde woman sitting in the passenger seat. He observed no one else in the vehicle with her. He also saw that a car was parked in spot 412. Back in his room, Raggio watched TV, fell asleep, and woke up and turned off the TV between 2 and 3 a.m. He heard nothing unusual throughout the course of the night, even though detectives knocked on opposite walls inside adjacent rooms 412 and 413 and determined that the slightest noise could easily be heard. A guest named Larry Rosado in room 410 also heard nothing. Donald Strange returned to the hotel around 12:30. He went to the front desk and asked for a toothbrush and toothpaste, but was told they did not have any. He noted nothing unusual, but he did note that there was a car parked in front of room 412 when he got back to his room. Mr. Raggio became a person of interest in the case for a very strange reason. The same housekeeper who had found Jack McDonald's body, Adelaide Wooten, told investigators that she was cleaning room 413, Raggio's room, on the morning of the 27th, and she found several pornographic magazines on the floor. One of the magazines featured photos of naked men. She put them in the garbage. But these magazines were recovered by police and fingerprints were lifted off them. Raggio denied that these magazines were his, but it seems that the one featuring men was enough to make police suspicious of him. The prints on the magazines were sent to the FBI for comparison purposes, and they did not match either Raggio or Jack McDonald. In December 1970, a murder occurred in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, that came to the attention of Meridian investigators. They had learned in the course of investigating the McDonald murder that the young salesman had recently moved to Birmingham from Fort Lauderdale, the location of the murder of another young salesman on December 4th of the same year. Further, this recent killing also involved a hotel room. Mark Hunter McConnell of San Francisco, California, was found dead in his room at the Oceanside Holiday Inn in Fort Lauderdale. He had been beaten to death on the head with the heavy ceramic lid of the hotel room toilet tank. His body was found still on the bed hours later by the hotel maid. Now, what led Meridian Chief of Detectives L.A. Willoughby to state to the Jackson Clarion Ledger that investigators were considering whether the two cases were linked? Apparently, there was a suspect in the Fort Lauderdale murder, and he matched the vague description of the man who had been seen having dinner with Jack McDonald just a few hours before he died. This suspect had been registered at the motel with McConnell. They had shared a room. This was 27-year-old James Robert Frankenberry, Jr. According to a December 14, 1970 article in the Clarion Ledger, quote, during the investigation following McDonald's death, one finger of evidence kept pointing toward Mobile and a man with a Scotch or Irish accent. The article does not say that Frankenberry was known to have such an accent, although it seems to be implied. But his physical description, according to the newspaper article, did match up with that of the man seen with Jack McDonald just 6 weeks earlier in Mississippi. Young, white, slender, brown wavy hair, blue eyes, 5'7" tall, 27 years old. Investigators put together that Frankenberry, a New Jersey native, and McConnell had met in Washington, D.C., and had traveled to Florida together. Contemporary news articles describe McConnell unflatteringly as a traveling smut salesman. In the jargon of the time, it meant that he was a peddler of homosexual pornographic materials. It's unknown what the relationship was between the two men, but they were registered at the Holiday Inn as sharing a room. By the time the maid found McConnell's bludgeoned body, Frankenberry had left the state in a 1971 Dodge the two men had rented a few days earlier in Miami. It was found abandoned in a parking lot in Mobile, Alabama, and another car had been stolen from that same lot. Police issued an arrest warrant and put out an APB for Frankenberry that extended across the 50 states. Interestingly, when authorities caught up with Frankenberry, he was in St. Louis, Missouri. He was apprehended at the airport, trying to catch a flight to Chicago. It turned out that not only was Frankenberry wanted for the McConnell murder, but he was a wanted bank robber as well. The FBI had been looking for him since he was caught on camera executing an armed holdup of a bank teller at the Roosevelt Savings and Loan on Locust Street in Chicago. He got away with $500, but his face is visible on the surveillance photos, and all the bills were marked. The teller, Miss Judy Dubbs, had been instructed to hand them over in the event of a robbery. Several articles about Frankenberry state that he used an alternate name, Robert Allen Marchand. A February 26, 1971 article in the St. Louis Dispatch says of Frankenberry, quote, "He is wanted in San Francisco for investigation in connection with a bank robbery and murder, and for questioning in several other bank robberies in cities from coast to coast." Despite Frankenberry being a wanted man in several different states, Florida authorities were able to interview him and get what they termed a full statement regarding the murder of Mark McConnell. It was sufficient to proceed with first-degree murder charges against Frankenberry, who was extradited to Florida. By October 1971, Frankenberry had pled guilty to the murder charge and had been sentenced to life in prison in the Florida State Penitentiary System. Simultaneously with that sentence, he was required to serve 20 years in federal prison for a bank robbery in St. Louis. This was at the federal prison at Lompoc in California. Frankenberry behaved himself until he and 3 other prisoners escaped from Lompoc in 1979. The 4 cut through the bars of a 3rd-floor window and lowered themselves to the ground using sheets. Then they cut through a perimeter fence and scaled another, escaping into the night as guards fired 8 shots at the men. Frankenberry was recaptured and returned to the prison within 3 days. His cronies were also recaptured within 3 weeks. He managed to escape from his cell again a few weeks later, but this time did not make it past the prison walls. James Frankenberry is currently in the Hamilton Correctional Institution in Jasper, Florida. In 2019, he sued the Florida Department of Corrections, alleging that his civil rights were being violated by prison conditions. So what does all this have to do with the Jack McDonald murder case, if anything? It's unknown to this day whether James Robert Frankenberry is responsible for the death of the young man in Meridian, Mississippi. The proximity in time of the 2 cases, the common centrality of Fort Lauderdale and, as investigators intimated, Memphis, the similarities in the circumstances with bludgeoning murders of young salesmen in hotel rooms, and the physical likeness of the suspects in both cases certainly provide ample room for suspicion that they could be related. But Frankenberry's description in the police reports we reviewed have him at just 5'7" and 130 pounds with scars around both eyes. And there is no mention of any kind of foreign accent. It seems safe to say, at the very least, that James Frankenberry is not the man in the composite drawing, seen having drinks and dinner with Jack McDonald on the night he was killed. And it does not seem that any of the other avenues that were explored paid off either. In August 1971, Mrs. Jean McDonald posted a $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible for the murder of her husband. 21 years passed with the McDonald case essentially lying dormant. In March 1991, a woman named Martha Thomas came to investigators with the following story. Her ex-husband was a man named Eugene Sims, who owned a truck stop in the Meridian area. They were married in the mid-1970s. One day during a fight, Eugene told Martha that if she wasn't careful, he would get Freddie Moore to do to her what he had done to the man at the Travel Inn. It was clear that he meant that Freddie would kill her. Now, Freddie Moore was the ex-husband of Pat Moore. Pat Moore, you may recall, was the name of one of the waitresses at the hotel bar, the Purple Onion, who had helped police make the composite drawing of the man seen in the bar with Jack McDonald. She had married Freddie Moore in 1971, the year after McDonald was killed. Martha told police that her husband Eugene and Pat's husband Freddie were very good friends and sold drugs at the truck stop in sort of a partnership. Back in 1970, Freddie was convinced that Jack McDonald was a regular at the hotel and that Pat, his girlfriend and soon-to-be wife, was seeing him, and that Pat had gone to the salesman's room that night. Freddie waylaid McDonald in his room and hacked him with a machete that he had bought at the Army surplus store. Eugene supposedly watched this whole event. Afterwards, they threw the machete and Freddie's bloody boots and shirt into the river. Freddie Moore was known to be violent and had a prison record, and he and Eugene later cackled about how they knew how to take care of men who ran around with their wives. Now, there are a lot of problems with this tale. For one, we know that this was Jack McDonald's first work trip to Meridian. It's remotely possible that he was a regular there, but since none of the staff recognized him, that seems highly unlikely. Second, Pat Moore told investigators in 1970 that she had left between 9 and 9:30 that night to go home sick. If this was true, there wasn't time for her to have a liaison with Jack in his hotel room. She told investigators that she had never cheated on Freddie. Also, Martha told the investigators that her husband told her that Freddie had cut off his victim's private parts. We know from the autopsy that this is not true. Martha's daughter told the 1991 investigators that her mother was crazy and probably trying to get her ex in trouble with the law. However, she admitted that her mother had told her years earlier that Freddie had killed a man at the Travel Inn while Eugene watched. And it is clear that investigators took this story very seriously. There are handwritten notes in the police file that indicate that they believed it was possible that Pat Moore had been in McDonald's room around 11 p.m. that night and had been interrupted in flagrante by Freddie and Eugene. An unnamed witness could ID Pat sitting in a car outside the room after 11 p.m. Could it be that perhaps Freddie Moore had killed Jack McDonald, flying into a rage after catching the salesman with his girl? Or could this be a case of mistaken identity? Perhaps for some reason Freddie believed that McDonald was the regular who was seeing his girl. We just don't know. But investigators were intrigued enough by these leads to convene an investigative grand jury in Lauderdale County to look into the McDonald murder case. The results of the grand jury inquiry are unknown. However, fingerprints lifted from the McDonald scene did not match either Freddie or Eugene. In 2015, the homicide department got a tip from a man named Dennis McGinnis about a man named Jerry Coates. Coates ran a produce store that Dennis delivered to fairly regularly. According to Dennis, Coates had a reputation in the area as a very dangerous man, having beaten up his wife to the point that he knocked her teeth out, among other things. Coates also owned a sheetrock business, which was rumored to be a front for Jerry's actual trade, which was running girls or pimping out of the Pine Haven Motel and selling bootleg whiskey. Coates personally told Dennis in 1973 or 1974 that he was the one who had killed the guy who was murdered at the Travel Inn. He said that the victim had gotten rough with one of Coates's girls, so he killed him with a machete. Now, this story could certainly be made up. This kind of braggadocio is very common in the underclass of criminals and gangsters, which is what Coates was rumored to be. But the Meridian PD's fingerprint examiner, Barbara Dubose, examined the fingerprints lifted from the scene with those of Jerry Coates and felt that one of the fingerprints found in room 412 was a close match with Coates. The prints were submitted to the crime lab for further analysis in August 2015. The prints from the 1970 murder were also run through AFIS at this time, and it had been 24 years since that had been done. Jerry Coates was not subjected to an interview at this time because he was dead. He was murdered, shot multiple times, while standing outside his trailer home in 1984. According to the informant, Dennis, Coates's mob connections had taken him out, as they had some of his associates. Other pals of Coates were in the pen, one for sex charges and one for murdering a family by burning their house down. There was no question that this Jerry Coates was a bad dude. Whether or not he killed Jack McDonald remains unknown. Okay, that was the McDonald case in a nutshell. As listeners can hear, it was quite complex, with numerous rumors emerging about promising-sounding suspects. But none of those have ever panned out. Let's go back to the crime scene, room 412. Photos of the scene show that Jack McDonald was found in the exact same position as William Kyle, except that his feet were crossed at the ankles. Both of them had been struck in the head with sharp implements as they lay face down on their pillows. Both were nude or nearly nude. There was no robbery save the missing wallet in the McDonald case. No fingerprints were found that could be connected to anyone. There was no forced entry into the room, and no one had seen or heard anything. And the toothpaste. Sound familiar? It did to investigators in Iowa, and it does to Paul Holes.
I've worked so many cases over the course of more than a quarter century now, and I haven't had a single case with toothpaste squirted out, let alone a case that involved a hatchet or similar item as being the weapon inside a hotel directly off of a freeway. No signs of forced entry. Men's wallets being dissected. So I start between these two cases, I start seeing a stack of offender behavior that becomes a signature and becomes compelling that these two cases are related. I am firmly convinced that these cases are related and we have a single offender, a serial killer, that is hatcheting, and his focus is the men, hatcheting men in hotel rooms.
Join us next time as we examine a serial killer with intriguing connections to the case of Roger and Rose. If you have any information about the murders of Roger Atkinson and Rose Burkert, please contact the Iowa County Sheriff's Office at 319-642-7307. Scene of the Crime is a production of AbJack Entertainment. It's narrated by me, Jamie Rice, and co-produced by Jessica Betancourt, Gray Hughes, and Mike Morford. It's written by Jessica Betancourt. Special thanks goes out to the family members and friends of Roger Atkinson and Rose Burkert who participated in this podcast. Thanks also goes out to Sheriff Rob Rotter and the Iowa County Sheriff's Department, Paul Holes, Ron Fisher, Tim Trishman, and Ida Block. If you'd like to help Scene of the Crime reach new listeners, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please recommend this podcast to your friends. You can find Scene of the Crime on Twitter at Scene of Crime Pod and on Facebook.